My dear friends, is there any greater pain than being cruelly betrayed by the Pernanda Isli Vens, husband we love with every fiber of our being? A pain that crushes not only love, but also our self-esteem, and even threatens the innocent life of our unborn child. I had to taste that bitter pain on a fateful afternoon when, carrying a 7-month-old baby in my womb, I watched my husband, the man for whom I sacrificed everything so he could achieve the success he has today, kick me. Without a second of hesitation, just to appease his young mistress, he used the heel of his expensive loafer to deliver a kick right to my pregnant belly. At that moment, I didn't fall. The piercing physical pain was nothing compared to the agony tearing my soul apart. In the middle of a bustling luxury mall at Columbus Circle in New York City, amidst the sharp screams and shocked gasps of the shoppers, I simply stood up in silence. I brushed the dirt off my maternity dress, took out my cell phone, and dialed. "Hello, Uncle George." My voice sounded terrifyingly calm. "Fire the chief. Commercial officer, Tyler Smith. Repossess all the luxury cars and the estate in Greenwich that are under his name. I give you 10 minutes. A command, a sentence, and the greatest spectacle of my life began just like that. That day, truth be told, had started out beautiful. New York City, after a heavy night's rain, felt crisp and clean. I was enjoying a rare afternoon of leisure, driving my own SUV into Manhattan to buy a few things for the day my sweet baby would be born. At 7 months pregnant, my body felt heavy, but my spirit was floating on clouds of absolute joy. I was caressing tiny baby onesies, imagining how adorable my little angel would look in them. Tyler and I had been waiting for this child for a long time. In my eyes, he was the perfect husband, handsome, talented, and incredibly spoiling. Since he found out I was pregnant, he had become even more attentive. He cooked organic, farm-to-table meals for me, massaged my swollen feet every night, and often pressed his ear against my parting as lie belly, whispering words of love to our baby. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. I was standing in front of a high-end jewelry store, admiring a tiny silver bracelet with an engraved heart, planning to buy it as a keepsake for my child, when a scene across the corridor made my blood freeze. Under the brilliant lights of a luxury designer boutique, a man and a woman were standing together, in flagrant intimacy. The man affectionately tucked a strand of hair behind the girl's ear, and then they both burst out laughing. My heart skipped a beat. That man, even from the back, was unmistakable. His tall silhouette, his bespoke tailored suit, and the limited edition Rolex I had bought him for his birthday. It was Tyler, my husband. He had told me he had an extremely important meeting with foreign investors that afternoon. And yet, here he was, with another woman. I tried to calm down. Maybe it was just a colleague, a friend. I shouldn't jump to conclusions. But their next move shattered all my fragile excuses. The girl stood on her tiptoes and planted a quick kiss on his lips. He didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled and wrapped his arm possessively around her waist. My entire world collapsed. The silver bracelet I was holding slipped from my fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp, dry, metallic clink. But I couldn't hear anything anymore. My ears were ringing, my vision blurred. I felt a sharp, suffocating pain in my chest, a difficulty breathing that was worse than the worst morning sickness. I grabbed onto a glass display case to keep from falling. 12 years. 12 years of love and building a life together, during which I placed all my trust in that man. And now, that trust was being trampled by him, without an ounce of mercy. I don't know where I found the strength to walk toward them. I only knew I couldn't walk away. I needed an explanation. I had to confront them. "Tyler," I called out, my voice trembling, almost unrecognizable. They both turned around, startled. When Tyler saw me, his face registered a brief flash of panic, but it lasted only a second. He quickly regained his blank composure, looking almost annoyed. The girl, a young model with a beautiful face, but eyes full of arrogance, looked me up and down. She stared at my loose maternity dress, then at my sensible flat shoes, and smirked, a smile dripping with contempt. "Oh, who is this, Tyler?" she said in a sickly sweet voice, clinging tighter to my husband's arm. "Is this your wife? She looks a bit frumpy, doesn't she?" Frumpy. That word felt like a slap to the face. I looked at Tyler, expecting him to say something, to defend me, but no. He merely brushed her hand gently, making no effort to push her away. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" he asked. Such a fake, superfluous question. "I should be the one asking you that," I replied, fighting back the tears threatening to spill. "You said you had a board meeting. Is this your business partner? What kind of nonsense are you spouting?" The girl interjected, her voice shrill. Does Tyler need to report his every move to a stay-at-home housewife who just leeches off her husband's success? "Shut up," I yelled. The anger could no longer be contained. "This is between my husband and me." "Husband and wife?" She laughed loudly. "Look in the mirror. Do you think you're still worthy of Tyler? You're old, worn out, and dragging that massive belly around. Do you think he'd still be interested in expired goods like you?" "Bella, that's enough," Tyler finally said, not to defend me, but to calm her down. He turned to me with a cold, cruel glare. "Go home. We'll talk about this tonight." "No," I insisted, planting my feet. "I want you to explain right now who she is." My insistence seemed to drain the last drop of his patience, or maybe it was an undamn opportunity for him to show off his masculinity in front of his mistress. "I told you to go home. Are you deaf?" he shouted. "She's the woman I love. Are you satisfied now?" Then he did something I will never forget for the rest of my life. Bella, the model, started whining again. "See, babe? She won't stop bothering us. Do something." And Tyler, just to appease his mistress, didn't hesitate. He raised his leg, and, with the hard heel of his expensive Italian shoe, he kicked me right in the stomach. A kick that wasn't overly forceful but contained all the cruelty, coldness, and inhumanity in the world. A sharp pain exploded in my lower abdomen, radiating through my entire body. I stumbled backward, instinctively wrapping my arms around the belly where my baby rested. People around us started screaming. Some rushed over to help me, but I didn't fall. I stood up straight and looked dead into the eyes of the two people in front of me. Tyler's face showed a flicker of panic. Perhaps even he hadn't expected himself capable of such a vile act. But Bella was smiling a satisfied, victorious smirk. In that instant, the love inside me died completely. All that remained was an entrouader, icy, bone-deep hatred. I didn't say a word. I simply took out my cell phone in silence. He and she watched me, probably thinking I was going to call a family member to cry and complain, but they were dead wrong. That phone call was a death sentence, and in exactly 10 minutes they were going to pay for that fateful kick. What fate awaits this cruel husband, and what is the true power of this mysterious woman? Stay with us to follow the upcoming developments, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Rings Twilight Tales channel so you never miss a dramatic story. My phone call ended quickly and quietly, in stark contrast to the chaotic scene all around me. Shoppers were still whispering and pointing. A few kind-hearted women rushed over to help me sit on a nearby bench, asking with deep concern, "Honey, are you okay? Should we call 911? What a monster of a husband. What kind of man hits a pregnant woman?" I just shook my head and thanked them with a small smile, a smile that probably looked incredibly out of place at that moment. I didn't feel pain, or rather, the physical pain had been completely eclipsed by another sensation, a chilling, absolute coldness. I sat there, my hands still shielding my belly, not to soothe the ache, but to protect, to silently promise my unborn child that Mommy would never let anyone hurt them ever again. Tyler and Bella, after their initial shock, seemed to regain their arrogant swagger. Seeing that I wasn't screaming or sobbing hysterically, they probably assumed I was just a weak domestic house cat who would cower and retreat after a Minor threat. Tyler didn't even step forward to see if I was okay. He just stood there, arms crossed, looking down at me with a superior sneer as if to say, "See? That's the price you pay for not knowing your place." Bella was even more smug. She clung to Tyler's arm, flashing her victorious smile. "Let's go, babe. I've lost all desire to shop. Why are we wasting time? With this dead weight?" They turned to walk away, acting as if they had just finished performing an amusing little play. They were savoring their victory, completely unaware that their 10 minutes of hell had just begun. I said nothing. I just watched the clock on my phone screen. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes passed, and then it happened. From both ends of the mall corridor, a group of men in crisp black security uniforms, tall, broad-shouldered, and imposing, approached swiftly and in perfect formation. They didn't look like standard mall cops. They looked like elite executive protection. Leading them was Ray, the head of security for the entire complex, a middle-aged man with a face carved from granite. I knew Ray well, because this entire luxury mall was a flagship, property of Gold Coast Holdings, my father's company. The security team quickly closed in on Tyler and Bella, forming a tight ring and blocking all escape routes. "Stop right there," Ray said, his voice deep and authoritative. "We received a 5-state per 5-tree to report of a public disturbance and physical assault committed by you two. We must ask you to accompany us to the security office for questioning." Tyler froze, turning to the security team with an expression of sheer disbelief. "What the hell are you doing? Do you know who I am?" he barked, trying to puff in his chest out and reclaim his executive posture. "I am Tyler Smith, the chief commercial officer of Gold Coast Holdings. How dare you treat me like this?" "We are well aware of who you are, Mr. Smith," Ray replied, zero emotion in his voice. "And we are acting under orders from the very top. Please cooperate." "Orders from the top!" Tyler yelled. "In this entire corporation, other than Executive Vice President George Hastings, nobody has the authority to give me orders." At that exact moment, the cell phone in Tyler's tailored pocket vibrated violently. He yanked it out in irritation and saw the name of the head of HR on the screen. He answered hastily, clearly thinking this was his salvation. "Linda, tell these mall cops to back off. They've lost their minds. They're actually trying to." He didn't finish the sentence. The color drained from his face instantly. The arrogant smirk and aggressive posture vanished, replaced by an expression of extreme, unadulterated panic. He stood there, eyes wide, jaw slack, the phone practically slipping from his trembling fingers. I couldn't hear what was being said on the other end, but I knew exactly what it was. It was the first strike, the starting gun of his downfall. I knew the head of HR was informing him of his immediate termination for gross misconduct and severe violation of corporate ethics. 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes after my phone call, the execution order had been carried out. From a high-flying, powerful executive, he had been reduced to an unemployed nobody in the blink of an eye. "No. This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice hollow, like a man whose soul had just been snatched from his body. Bella, standing next to him, was also in shock. She didn't fully grasp corporate politics, but her gold-digger intuition told her that the human ATM she was clinging to was about to dispense zero cash. "Please come with us," Ray repeated, stripped of all patience. This time, Tyler had no strength left to resist. He stumbled, letting 2 large security guards grab his arms. Before he was led away, he turned back to look at me. His gaze was no longer filled with contempt. It was a chaotic mix of fear, bewilderment, and a massive, unanswered question. "Why?" I didn't answer. I just met his eyes with a cold, distant stare. "This is just the beginning, Tyler. Your nightmare is only just starting." Once they were dragged away, EMTs stationed at the mall rushed over with a wheelchair to take me to a private clinic upstairs for a checkup. Tyler's kick, though vicious, thankfully hadn't landed with full force. After an ultrasound, the doctor confirmed the baby was perfectly fine. I had only suffered a mild bruising, But I knew the deepest wound wasn't physical. Yet, they didn't know that the very same kick had awakened someone else inside of me. A person I didn't even fully realize existed, someone incredibly ruthless and determined. To understand why I held such terrifying power, why a simple phone call from a housewife could nuke a C-level executive's career in 10 minutes, we have to rewind a long way. 12 years to be exact. 12 years. Enough time to turn a young princess into a mature woman, and enough time to hide and flashed an earth-shattering secret. 12 years ago, I, Sophia, had just turned 20. I was a sophomore at an Ivy League university in Massachusetts. My life back then was a literal fairy tale. I was born into immense wealth, the only child of Matthew Vance, the founder and chairman of Gold Coast Holdings, one of the most powerful real estate and investment empires in the United States. My father was my whole world. He wasn't just a brilliant businessman, he was an alien.common, incredibly loving and understanding dad. He never forced me to follow in his corporate footsteps. He gave me the freedom to choose my own path and supported every decision I made. I thought my life would just glide peacefully under his loving shadow, but then tragedy struck. While on a business trip to Europe, my father suffered a sudden, massive heart attack and passed away. My sky collapsed. I flew back to New York that very night, but I only arrived in time to see his cold face, resting in a casket. I had lost my only pillar, my entire universe. Amidst my paralyzing grief and despair, Mr. George, whom I lovingly called Uncle George, came to see me. Uncle George was the executive vice president of the Claus President Group, my father's best friend, his blood brother who helped him build the brother empire from the ground up. He had no children of his own and had always treated me like a daughter. He handed me a letter my father had written for me. It was a spiritual last will and testament. "Sophia, my darling girl," my father wrote, "when you read these lines, I will have already left for a faraway place. Don't be too sad, my child. You are strong. I know that. I have left you the entirety of Gold Coast Holdings, but my girl, I have lived my whole life in the corporate world, and I have witnessed far too much deceit and betrayal. It is all driven by money and power. I am afraid, I am terrified that you, a pure-hearted girl, will be broken by these things. I am afraid you won't be able to find a man who loves you for who you are, but rather for the immense fortune you possess. Therefore, I have one request, one final challenge for you. Temporarily bury your identity. Live as a normal, everyday person for 12 years. 12 years is enough time to experience real life, to understand the true value of a blank dollar, and to see the reality of human relationships. And most importantly, it is enough time to find a man who truly deserves you. Your Uncle George will manage the corporation for you, but you will always be the true chairman. All major decisions will still cross your desk, but to the rest of the world, you will just be a normal girl. After 12 years, or when you find true happiness and feel the time is right, come back. Promise me, my child." My father's letter completely rewrote my destiny. I decided to honor his dying wish. I dropped out of my elite university. I shed the name Sophia Vance, the billionaire heiress of Gold Coast Holdings, and became just Sophia, an average girl with a fabricated backstory, an orphan who moved from the Midwest to the Parda, big city to build a modest life. Uncle George helped me create the perfect facade. I moved out of our Manhattan penthouse and into a tiny walk-up apartment in Brooklyn. I got a job as a basic clerical worker in a small, unrelated logistics company to pay my own bills. My double life began. Those days were not easy, going from an heiress who never looked at a price tag to a girl calculating every penny for subway fare and groceries. I had to learn how to survive. But those hardships forged me into a different person, stronger, more resilient, and deeply appreciative of the value of hard work. I was still the shadow CEO of Gold Coast Holdings. Every week, I held top-secret meetings with Uncle George in secure locations. I remained the ultimate decision-maker, keeping a multi-billion-dollar empire running. But the moment I left those meetings, I reverted to my role as a regular office drone. It was a stressful but fascinating duality. I grew immensely. And then, a few years into this experiment, I met Tyler. That encounter opened a new chapter in my life. A chapter I thought was written in pure happiness, but which turned out to be a meticulously orchestrated tragédie. I met Tyler during a collaborative project my small company had with a subsidiary of Gold Coast Holdings. At the time, he was a young, hungry sales rep. He stood out because of his good looks, his silver tongue, and a raw, unapologetic ambition. He took the initiative to pursue me. He told me he was blown away by my sharp mind and unique perspectives, noticing that behind my lawn, average appearance was an extraordinary intellect. He was different from the polished, trust fund boys I had grown up around. He had a gritty sincerity and a burning desire to win. He told me about his humble upbringing in a struggling, rusted-out town in Ohio, about his dream of climbing the corporate ladder to finally retire his hardworking mother. I saw a reflection of myself in him, someone who also had to fight to survive in the city, and I fell deeply in love. Our romance was intense. He was romantic, attentive, and always knew how to make me smile. He didn't buy me expensive gifts because he knew I didn't care for them, and he couldn't afford them anyway. Instead, he gave me his time, his undivided attention, and sincere gestures. I genuinely believed he was the man my father wanted me to find, a man who loved me not for my bank account, but for my soul. When he proposed, I was ecstatic. I thought my father's challenge had finally been fulfilled. I had found my happiness. But I chose not to immediately reveal my true identity and reclaim my throne. I wanted to continue living this simple, peaceful life, building our happiness brick by brick from the ground up. After we got married, I quit my clerical job. I told him I wanted to be a full-time homemaker, so he could focus entirely on his career without worrying. About the house, Tyler was deeply moved. He swore to me he would never let me suffer. But even as a housewife, I couldn't help but worry about his future. I knew that, with his drive, he deserved the best opportunities, and I, wielding the invisible power of a chairman, could hand them to him. Secretly, I began paving his road to success. Through Uncle George, I casually orchestrated opportunities for Tyler to showcase his talent. High-stakes projects, VIP clients, massive accounts, everything was subtly funneled directly to him. And Tyler, sharp as a tack, didn't waste a single opening. He secured victory after victory. His climb to the top was incredibly, unnaturally smooth. From a mere sales rep, he was fast-tracked to team lead, then department manager, and, finally, chief commercial officer. Everyone in the company marveled at his raw talent and incredible luck. Little did they know that behind his meteoric rise was the invisible hand of the woman he viewed as just a housewife. But achieving massive success too quickly changed Tyler. He was no longer the sincere, humble Ohio boy. He became arrogant, entitled, and vain. He started having complicated friendships outside our home. He left early, came home late, and family dinners became a rarity. He always claimed it was because of work that he had to entertain high-net-worth clients. And I, blinded by love and unwavering trust, believed every word. I was so proud of my husband's success, completely blind to the fact that I had created a monster, a man, intoxicated by power and flattery. I gave him everything, a top-tier career, a life of absolute luxury, including a massive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, and a fleet of exotic cars. All of it secretly funded by me, but put entirely in his name to protect his ego and maintain appearances, plus my unconditional love. But for him, it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted the thrill of the Paris seas chase, the adoration of young models, and he was willing to stomp on everything we built to feed his ego. The fateful kick that day in the mall was just the climax, the inevitable explosion of a long process of moral decay, but he had no idea he had awoken the wrath of the absolute wrong person. He had just burned his entire life to the ground with his own 2 hands. After being thoroughly examined in the VIP wing of the mall's medical center, the doctor reiterated that Tyler's kick, while vicious, had miraculously spared the fetus. The physical ache was fading, but the pain in my heart was metastasizing into something cold and hard. I sat there, staring blankly out the window. Uncle George arrived the moment he heard the news. He didn't say much. He just sat next to me in silence, placing a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder. That quiet gesture of solidarity was worth 1,000 empty words of comfort. I had him thrown into the corporate security holding room, he finally said, his voice rumbling with suppressed rage. The Model 2, they're locked in there, waiting for your orders. What do you want to do, Sophia? I turned to him. My eyes were completely dry now, replaced by a cutting frost. Uncle George, I said, my voice equally cold. I was wrong. For the last 12 years, I've been living inside a dream I built myself. It's time to wake up. I want everything back. Every single thing that belongs to me. Understood? Uncle George gave a firm, decisive nod. Where do you want to start? The Greenwich estate and the cars, I replied flatly. They are all in his name, but they were purchased with my private funds. I want them seized immediately. That's easy, Uncle George said. I kept duplicates of every bill of sale, every wire transfer. We have airtight legal proof that you are the beneficial owner, but he's not going to let go of them without a fight. I don't care, I interrupted. I'm done dragging this out. Do whatever it takes, as fast as humanly possible. I don't want to see his face in that house for one more second. And just like that, another command was issued. Gold Coast Holdings' elite legal team, the most terrifying corporate sharks in Manhattan, were mobilized. They moved at warp speed. Injunctions, asset seizure warrants based on proof of beneficial ownership, were fast-tracked through a friendly federal judge via emergency procedures. Everything was executed in total silence while Tyler was still sweating in a windowless security room, completely oblivious to the hurricane about to obliterate his life. Inside that security room, Tyler spent the most agonizing hours of his existence. He was locked in a small room with no windows, just a metal table and a chair. He screamed, pounded on the door, demanded a lawyer, demanded his phone. Call, but it was all useless. The deafening silence and the icy glares of the guards made him slowly realize that his sea-level title meant absolutely nothing. Down here. By late afternoon, he was finally released, along with Bella. Mr. Smith, you are officially terminated, Ray, the head of security told him, coldly. We have also filed a formal incident report regarding your physical assault. The victim, your wife, has chosen not to press criminal charges today. Consider this a final act of mercy. As of this second, you are permanently banned from all Gold Coast Holdings properties. Get out. Tyler was paralyzed. He couldn't process how everything had been stripped away. So fast, so ruthlessly. Bella, standing next to him, was pale and shaking. She didn't dare act arrogant or raise her voice anymore. She frantically yanked on Tyler's arm. Let's just go home, babe. Let's go home and figure this out. Home. Right. He still had his house. He still had his sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in Greenwich. He still had his Porsche and his Mercedes. He lost his job, sure, but he was still a rich man with assets. That was how he tried to comfort himself. They hailed an Uber Black and rode in. Silence all the way to the upscale Connecticut suburbs. He needed to find me. He needed to spin a lie, smooth things over. His massive ego still fully believed that if he just apologized, if he begged on his knees, I, his weak, hopelessly devoted housewife, would fold and take him back. But when the car turned onto his familiar, manicured street, a highly unusual scene caught his eye. Parked squarely in front of the wrought iron gates of his Carradix estate was a massive moving truck. Several burly workers were hauling custom Italian furniture out of the front doors and loading it into the back. Stop! Stop the car! Tyler yelled at the driver. He scrambled out and sprinted toward the gate. The magnificent iron gate he was so proud of was now wrapped in heavy industrial chains, secured with a massive padlock. Inside the property lines, a group of strangers in suits were walking around with clipboards, supervising the extraction. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" Tyler screamed, grabbing the iron bars and shaking them violently. "Who gave you permission to step on property?" A man in a sharp black suit, looking like an asset manager, calmly walked down the driveway. He was an executive from the wealth management firm Uncle George had contracted. "Good afternoon, sir," the man said politely, but with eyes like ice. "I'm sorry, but this is no longer your residence. Ownership of this estate has been legally reclaimed by its rightful beneficial owner. We are simply executing a court-approved asset seizure." "Rightful owner? Where is my wife? Where is Sophia?" Tyler bellowed. "What kind of illegal stunt is she pulling?" "We are not obligated to answer your questions," the man replied. "But here," he slipped a thick stack of legal documents through the iron bars. "This is the court-ordered seizure of the two vehicles registered under your name, the Porsche 911 and the Mercedes G-Wagon. The tow trucks are on their way. Hand over the keys now." Tyler stared at the paperwork in a complete daze. Every page bore the official stamp of a federal judge. It was all real. He hadn't just been fired. He had been evicted from his own castle. His cars were gone. He had lost everything. Literally everything. In a single afternoon. "No, this can't be happening." He staggered backward as if he had been physically struck, his legs giving out. Bella, standing behind him, looked as white as a sheet. She looked at the Prosen, sprawling mansion, at the luxury furniture being packed away, and then down at Tyler, who was hyperventilating on the sidewalk. The man was bankrupt. Without a second of hesitation, she turned on her heel. "Tyler, you figure your own mess out. We are done." With that, she tapped her phone, ordered another car, and vanished. She left. Tyler completely alone, abandoned in the smoldering ruins of his life. And the Brady nightmare wasn't even close to being over. The taillights of Bella's ride faded around the corner, taking with it Tyler's very last sliver of hope for companionship, even a fake one. He sat alone, pathetic and broken, on the quiet, exclusive streets of Greenwich. In front of him, the cold, locked gates. Behind him, the roar of the moving truck's engine. Every piece of furniture loaded away felt like a knife carving out a piece of his identity. He lost his high-paying job, his trophy mistress, and now his mansion and cars. Everything he used to build his facade of being an elite, self-made man had crumbled into dust in a matter of hours. The shock and crushing humiliation slowly morphed into a blind, rabid fury. He stopped screaming. Instead, he gritted his teeth, his fists trembling uncontrollably. His bloodshot eyes glared at the gate as if he wanted to tear it down with his bare hands. "Sophia! Sophia!" he growled, the sound of a wounded, cornered animal. He refused to believe it. He could not comprehend how his wife, the meek, submissive homemaker he had manipulated and looked down upon for years, could pull off something so financially and legally devastating. She has to have someone behind her. She definitely found some rich old billionaire sugar daddy. The thought invaded his mind and quickly calcified into an ironclad conviction. Only an entity with massive wealth and terrifying influence could execute a corporate firing and a judicial asset seizure this fast. He had to find that person. He had to find me and force a confrontation to flip the board. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed my number, but all he got was the monotonous drone of an unreachable line. I had blocked him across all platforms. Desperate, he started calling people he thought might know where I was. He called our mutual friends, but they all abruptly hung up or claimed ignorance. He called his former subordinates, the exact people who used to kiss his shoes, but now their voices were distant, annoyed, and cold. "Sorry, Tyler. I'm stepping into a meeting." Click. The brutal cruelty of the real world hit him like a freight train. He finally realized that without his title, without his corporate power, he was a nobody. No one wanted to catch the disease of a disgraced radioactive executive. His fury drained away, replaced by an expanding void of dread. He wandered the 7 unfamiliar, dark suburban streets aimlessly. His bespoke suit was wrinkled and stained. His perfectly styled hair was a mess, his face hollowed out. He walked until the sun fully set, finally collapsing onto a bus stop bench, staring at the headlights passing by, feeling an abyss opening in his chest. What was he going to do? He had no cash, no home, nowhere to sleep. And in his pathetic desperation, he remembered the one person who had always bailed him out, his mother. He dialed her number back in their rusty Ohio hometown. "Hey Mom, it's me, Tyler," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the dam broke. All his humiliation and resentment exploded, and he began to sob like a toddler. "Mom, I lost everything. Everything. My wife. She set me up. She destroyed me." On the other end of the line, Mrs. Smith heard her golden boy crying, and her heart caught fire. Being an aggressive woman who worshipped her son blindly, she listened to his twisted, exaggerated tale painting himself as the innocent victim of a cruel, adulterous wife who stole his assets. Her rage went nuclear. "What? That ungrateful little tramp dared to do this to you?" she screamed into the receiver. "You stay right there, Tyler. Let Mom handle this. I am getting on a bus right now. I'm coming to New York, and I am going to rip that little fox's mask off in front of the whole world. I'll get your money back." The call ended, and Tyler felt a sick sense of relief. He had his mother. She would fight for him. He still had a shield. Little did he know, his mother's arrival wouldn't solve a single thing. It would only drag them both into a deeper layer of hell, making his absolute destruction even more spectacularly pathetic. While Tyler was drowning in despair, waiting for his mommy to rescue him, I was in a completely different world. I was resting in a penthouse VIP maternity suite at a premier private hospital in Manhattan, a hospital whose real estate was largely owned by Gold Coast Holdings. After the trauma at the mall, even though the doctors cleared me, Uncle George insisted I be admitted for 2 4-hour monitoring and world-class care. "You and the air are the only things that matter right now," he told me firmly. "Let me handle the garbage disposal." The suite was massive and opulent, resembling a 5-star hotel penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of Central Park. The air was perfectly climate-controlled and peaceful. I lay in the ultra-plush bed, my hands gently resting on my stomach, feeling every tiny flutter of my baby. My soul was slowly finding its center again. The pain and resentment were still there, but they were no longer eating me alive. I had a supreme reason to live, to be unbreakable. My child could not afford a broken mother. I wouldn't let that filth contaminate this pure, innocent life. Uncle George visited frequently. He didn't bore me with the details of Tyler's miserable reality. He brought me gourmet cravings, excellent books, and told me funny stories. He wanted my blood pressure low and my mind relaxed. But I knew that out there in the concrete jungle, he was commanding my war. The corporate, legal team was already prepping for the inevitable legal slaughter. Everything was serene until one morning my peace was shattered. Mrs. Smith had taken an overnight Greyhound bus from Ohio to New York. She didn't call ahead. She had first gone to the Gold Coast corporate headquarters, where security physically tossed her out. Then she took a train up to the Greenwich estate, only to be met by a heavily armed private security detail who threatened to call the cops. Finally, through God knows what manic persistence, she tracked down the hospital where I was staying and showed up. Not as a loving mother-in-law coming to check on her pregnant daughter-in-law, but as a rabid bulldog coming to demand blood for her son. I was sitting by the window reading when I heard shouting and a massive commotion in the hallway. "Get out of my way. Let me in. What room is my daughter-in-law in? Where is Sophia? Let me see her." That shrill, piercing Ohio accent was unmistakable. My stomach tied itself into a knot. She had found me. 2 young nurses tried to block her, but they were no match for the Plady of today. Adrenaline-fueled rage of this woman. She shoved past them and practically kicked the heavy mahogany door of my suite open. She stood in the doorway, panting heavily. She looked completely different from the docile, sweet old country lady she always pretended to be around me. Standing there was a woman with a beet-red face, wild eyes, and hair frizzed from a 1-2 hour bus ride. "Aha! There you are," she hissed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "You adulterous little tramp. You dare sit up here living the high life? What did you do to my son? What kind of voodoo did you use to frame him and throw him out on the street?" She lunged toward me like a feral animal, but the hospital's private security arrived just in time. 2 massive guards grabbed her arms and locked her in. "Plus, let go of me, get your hands off me," she thrashed, spitting curses. "My son, he was so good to you. He loved you so much. And you had the nerve to do this? You're sleeping around with some rich old man, and then you invent lies to kick my boy out of his own house. Do you even have a soul? Is that baby in your belly even my son's, or is it some bastard's?" "Shut your mouth!" I roared, my voice cutting through the room like a whip, instantly silencing her screeches. For the first time in 12 years, I dropped the polite act. This disrespect had crossed the point of no return. "Say that one more time," I said, rising slowly from my armchair and walking toward her. My 7-month belly made my steps heavy, but my gaze was lethal. "You dare raise your voice at me in my room?" She flinched, momentarily intimidated by the sheer authority radiating from me. "I won't just raise my voice," I continued, my tone dropping to an icy whisper. "I can do a lot worse, Mrs. Smith. You say your son is a good man? Does a good man have the absolute cruelty to kick his own 7-month pregnant wife in the teen? Stomach in front of hundreds of people? You say I cheated on him? Did you know your precious little angel brought his cheap mistress to a luxury mall to publicly humiliate me? You're making that up," she stammered, but a flicker of genuine doubt crossed her eyes. "Whether I'm making it up or not, go ask your golden boy." I gave her a pitying smirk. "Oh, but maybe you can't find him right now. He's too busy enjoying his new life. A life with no house, no car, and a permanently blacklisted career. All by his own choosing. Our standoff would have escalated into violence if it weren't for the arrival of a third party." The suite doors swung open again. Uncle George strode in, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers in immaculate Tom Ford suits. The atmosphere in the Ruggio room instantly grew heavy, suffocating. Mrs. Smith's pathetic crusade for justice was about to meet a horribly humiliating end. Uncle George's presence was like a bucket of ice water dumped over Mrs. Smith's raging fire. She might not have known my true identity, but it was impossible for her not to recognize Mr. George Hastings. His face, as the ruthless executive VP of Gold Coast Holdings, was frequently splashed across CNBC and Forbes magazine. To a working-class woman from Ohio, he was a financial titan, a man existing in a stratosphere she could never touch. And yet here he was, standing imposingly right in front of her. Mr. Hastings?" she stuttered, her voice losing all its shrill arrogance, dropping to a terrified squeak. "Why? Why are you here?" Uncle George didn't even dignify her with a glance. His eyes locked onto me, filled with paternal concern. "Sophia, are you all right? What is going on here?" He quickly walked to my side, helping me sit back down on the edge of the bed. "I'm fine, Uncle George," I replied, shaking my head dismissively. "Just a little pest control issue." "Pest control?" Uncle George then slowly turned to face Mrs. Smith. His eyes were no longer kind. They were dead and sharp as a scalpel. "Ma'am, I have no idea who you are, but this is a hospital. It is a place of healing, and this is the private suite of an extremely VIP patient. Your psychotic behavior and screaming have severely violated protocol. I can have the NYPD drag you out of here in handcuffs right now." Mrs. Smith took a terrified step back. Her brain was short-circuiting, trying to compute why the vice chairman of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate had personally rushed to a hospital to fiercely defend the daughter-in-law. I thought was just a useless tramp. I was just coming to visit my daughter-in-law," she tried to justify herself, backpedaling hard. "She and my son just had a little misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Uncle George scoffed, a dark, cynical laugh. "A misunderstanding that leads your son, a chief commercial officer, to physically kick his 7-month pregnant wife in the stomach in public? A misunderstanding that results in him being terminated for cause in 10 minutes, having every single asset he touched legally seized, and rendering him utterly bankrupt? Ma'am, I highly suggest you find a more accurate vocabulary word, like suicidal, stupidity, or self-annihilation. Every word Uncle George spoke hit Mrs. Smith like a sledgehammer to the skull. She was paralyzed. So what I had said was true. Her son really had lost everything, and the one who pulled the trigger was the terrifying billionaire, standing right in front of her. But why? She whispered, staring into the void. Why did you treat my son like this? What did he do to you? What did he do to me? Uncle George raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. Let me educate you. He betrayed the absolute trust of the woman who sacrificed everything to build his pathetic life. He had an affair. He humiliated her, publicly, and he was mind-numbingly stupid enough to provoke the wrath of the blank. One person on this earth he should have spent his entire life worshipping. And who is that person? She asked, her eyes darting around in confusion. Uncle George didn't answer immediately. He looked at me, silently asking for permission. I gave him a subtle nod. It was time to pull the curtain back. Uncle George cleared his throat, adjusting his suit jacket, and made this declaration, a declaration that put a permanent end to Mrs. Smith's delusion, revealing a terrifying truth she couldn't have imagined in her wildest nightmares. Ma'am, Uncle George said, his voice booming with solemn authority, the person your son provoked, the person who ordered his immediate termination and an aggressive seizure of all his assets, the person sitting right in front of you, is the chairman and majority shareholder of Gold Coast Holdings, Miss Sophia Vance. And then Uncle George turned to me and did something that left Mrs. Smith, the two lawyers, completely stunned. He bowed deeply, a perfect 90-degree angle, demonstrating absolute unquestionable reverence. Madam Chairman, I have handled the garbage. Please, rest and focus on the air. The suite plunged into an absolute deafening silence, broken only by the proter's rhythmic beep of my heart monitor. Mrs. Smith stood there, petrified, her eyes bulging out of her skull, her jaw unhinged. Chairman? She muttered, her voice hollow. Sophia is the... She couldn't even finish the sentence. Her entire worldview, everything she believed to be true, was flipped on its head and set on fire. The orphaned, country bumpkin, dependent daughter-in-law she had despised and bullied for years was, in reality, her son's supreme boss, the apex predator who held the destiny of their entire bloodline in the palm of her hand. The truth was too massive, too brutal. It was far more terrifying than the fact that her son was homeless and unemployed. It completely obliterated her pride and her last shred of dignity. And I knew that, even though this act of the play was over, a much darker question still hung in the air. An even more sinister secret about her golden boy was about to be dragged into the light. The psychological shock Mrs. Smith suffered in that hospital room was a fatal blow that permanently deleted her aggression. She stopped screaming. She stopped cursing. The security guards let her go, and she simply slumped onto a cold bench in the hallway, staring into nothingness, her body shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Uncle George didn't bother her anymore. He just had the guards escort her out of the VIP wing, leaving her alone to choke on the reality she had just discovered. I knew she would call Tyler immediately, and I knew he would come. I was waiting for this final showdown. About an hour later, he arrived. He didn't burst into my room with self-righteous fury like his mother. He crept in slowly, silently, like a thief, walking to the gallows. His face was entirely drained of blood, looking like a corpse. His eyes were locked onto me, swirling with absolute terror, panic, and a suffocating disbelief. He already knew. His mother had definitely told him everything. Sophia? He croaked, his voice cracking. He didn't call me babe or honey, just Sophia, a name I hadn't heard him say with that much fear in years. I didn't reply. I just sat up in my bed, resting against the plush pillows, observing him with absolute calm. My silence only acted as a pressure cooker for his terror. Is it true, Sophia? He stammered, leaning against the doorframe to keep from collapsing. What my mom just told me about your identity. Is it true? What do you think? I asked back, my voice eerily smooth. He swayed, grabbing the wall. He looked at me, then at the opulent billionaire, sweet, then at the massive floral arrangement sent by Wall Street hedge funds, and finally at Uncle George, who was standing in the corner with his arms crossed, looking like an executioner. Every single puzzle piece, every bizarre incongruity of the past 12 years, suddenly snapped together with terrifying clarity. The lightning-fast termination, the flawless, ironclad asset seizure, the bizarrely deferential attitude everyone at the top always had toward him. Everything made perfect, horrible sense now. Why? He whispered, practically begging. Why did you lie to me for 12 years? Lie? I let out a cold, sharp laugh. Who exactly has been lying to whom here? Tyler? I gave you pure, sincere love. I sacrificed my own spotlight to build yours. And how did you repay me? With betrayal, public humiliation, and a literal kick to your unborn child. You tell me who the liar is. He was struck dumb. He couldn't formulate a single excuse. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor, kneeling right at the foot of my bed. Sophia, I screwed up, he wailed, bursting into ugly, snot-nosed tears. I know. I messed up. I'm a monster. I'm a piece of garbage. Please, forgive me. Give me one last chance. I swear to God I'll change. I'll divorce you. No, wait, I'll cut her off right now. I'll stay right by your side. I'll take care of you and our baby. Let's just start over. The pathetic theater of begging and repentance was in full swing, but this time, it wasn't fueled by love. It was fueled by absolute primal terror. He was terrified of my power, terrified of facing a life with absolutely nothing. Start over? I sneered. Do you honestly think that after everything you did, we can just hit reset? Do you think a few crocodile tears can wash away the physical assault and the profound disrespect you showed me? I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Tyler, you drastically underestimated me. But more importantly, you drastically underestimated the price of treason. I gave Uncle George a look. He nodded, stepped forward, and dropped a manila, 2 folder onto my bedside table. Before you keep begging for mercy, I said, maybe you should take a look at, is this. Let's see if there are any other little mistakes you forgot to confess. To me, Tyler looked up at the folder, his hands shaking violently. He didn't understand. He thought his ultimate sin was adultery. He had no idea that cheating was just the tip of the iceberg. The darkest secret, the true cancer of his life, was about to be laid bare. The folder Uncle George dropped wasn't thick, but every single page inside held the weight of undeniable felonies. It was the result of a deep, forensic, internal audit that Uncle George had secretly launched the very second Tyler was fired. Per my explicit orders, I didn't just want to punish him for breaking my heart. I needed to know exactly what he had done with the corporate power I had secretly gifted him. Was he ever worthy of the trust Gold Coast Holdings placed in him? The answer was worse than I could have ever imagined. Tyler, trembling, flipped open the first page. It was a forensic audit report on the first page, the commercial projects he had overseen over the last 2 years since becoming CCO. On paper, they were massive victories that generated tens of millions to revenue. But when Uncle George's sharks dug into the ledgers, they found subtly inflated vendor costs and bizarre expenses hidden under legitimate budget codes. Remember the luxury condo development down in Miami? I asked, my frosty voice cutting through the suffocating silence. The project you presented to the board as a massive triumph that netted the company over $5 million? You were highly compensated for that. Given massive bonuses, Tyler looked up, a ghost of his former corporate pride flashing across his face, before dying instantly. But guess what? I continued. The audit team discovered that the actual Construction costs were inflated by you and your little cronies by at least $1 million. Where did that money go, Tyler? He froze. Beads of cold sweat began to drip down his forehead. He frantically flipped to the next page. There it was. A flowchart of multiple shell companies, bogus consulting firms, and phantom raw material suppliers, all of them registered to his frat buddies and distant cousins in Ohio. He had rigged the bidding process, ensuring these Dumesh shell companies won Gold Coast contracts at highly inflated rates, and, obviously, the fat margins were quietly kicked back to him in offshore accounts. His scheme wasn't original, but it was systematic. He had built an entire as an ADA, parasitic network to suck blood from the very corporation that had crowned him. But that wasn't all. His greed wasn't limited to corporate kickbacks. How do you explain this one? I asked, pointing a manicured finger at a specific contract. A purchase agreement for a premium commercial lot. The client paid the full escrow amount, but those funds never hit the Gold Coast Treasury. Instead, they were wired directly to a private LLC account, an account registered to a Mary Smith, your mother. No, that's not true, Tyler stammered, his voice cracking. It was an accounting error. The client misdirected the wire. An error? I laughed. They misdirected 3 separate wires totaling like $500,000? Tyler, don't insult my intelligence. You used your executive title to embezzle client funds. This isn't just an ethics violation. This is wire fraud, grand larceny, embezzlement. At that exact moment, Tyler's spine completely snapped. He had no more excuses. His entire criminal enterprise was laid out in high definition: signatures, IP, addresses, bank routing numbers, ironclad proof. He hadn't just betrayed me as a wife, he had betrayed the corporation, the shareholders, and the law. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. His crying was no longer a performance. It was the visceral wail of a Papsterden man who knew he was looking at the end of his life. I sat there, watching him without a single drop of pity. This man dug his own grave. He had it all: a wife who adored him, an unlimited career trajectory, unimaginable wealth. But his blinding arrogance and bottomless greed forced him to burn it all down. But there was one final secret. A twist so pathetic even I hadn't anticipated. On the very last page of the dossier, after weeping into his hands for a few minutes, Tyler slowly looked up. The begging was gone. Instead, he looked at me, with the dead, hollow eyes of a man who knows he has absolutely nothing left to lose. Okay, he said, his voice raspy and defeated. I take the hit for all of this. I screwed up, and I'll face the music. But what about her? A spark of venomous hatred flared in his eyes. Bella. She was in on all of this. She was the one constantly demanding Birkin bags, Porsches, cash. Why does she get to walk away? Clean? I smiled. A slow, chilling smile. Do you really think I was going to let her walk? Rest assured, Tyler. The tab she's about to pay is just as expensive as yours. I gestured to Uncle George. He dropped a second, thinner folder onto the bed. This is my parting gift for your lovely model, I said. Care to take a look? Morbidly curious, Tyler opened it. Inside was the unvarnished, filthy truth of Bella's career. Uncle George's private investigators hadn't needed much time to unearth her reality. Bella was not some starry-eyed, innocent runway model. She was an apex predator, a professional sugar baby and blackmailer. Before Tyler, countless other wealthy Wall Street guys had fallen into her trap. The folder contained surveillance photos of her in highly compromising situations with married hedge fund managers, bank statements showing massive hush money deposits, and even screenshots of text messages she sent to her friends, openly bragging about how easily she milked dumb rich suits for cash. But the kill shot was a thumb drive taped to the back cover. Play it, I ordered. Tyler plugged it into his phone. An audio file began to play. It was a recording of Bella talking to another man on the phone, time-stamped just 10 minutes, after she had abandoned Tyler on the curb in Greenwich. I dumped him. Bella's voice echoed from the phone speaker, dripping with absolute disgust. The idiot thought he was some Wall Street god, but it turns out he was just a broke parasite living off his wife's trust fund. He got fired. His house got seized. He has no cars. What's the point of keeping a broke loser around? I'm moving on to the guy from Goldman. Tyler listened to the venomous, cruel words coming from the mouth of the woman he had just blown up his marriage for. His face morphed from pale to a sickly green. He had torched his entire existence for her, only to realize he was nothing but a mark, a walking ATM. See? I said softly. That is the woman you called your true love. To her, you were just a wallet. The second the card declined, she cut you loose to find a new host. And just so you know, copies of this entire folder have already been messengered to her modeling agency, Page 6, and every major gossip outlet in New York. Her career is permanently over. The destruction of his mistress didn't bring Tyler any comfort. It only plunged him into an even deeper, darker abyss. He realized he was just a pawn in a much larger game, played and discarded by his own vanity. So, this is it, he whispered into the void. It's all over. Not quite, I replied. Your problem right now isn't a messy divorce, Tyler. It is a federal criminal case. I tapped the thick folder of financial audits. With the evidence in this file, my legal team can hand you over to the FBI tomorrow morning. Wire fraud and embezzlement at this scale carries a mandatory minimum of 20 years in federal prison. It's not a question of if you go to a cell, but when. He stared at me, pure, unadulterated terror radiating from his pores. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Sophia, I'm begging you. He started again, dropping his head to the floor. Please, don't do this. If I go to federal prison, what happens to my mom? How? Will she survive? Think about our baby. Do you really want your child to grow up, knowing their father is a convicted felon? He was actually using his elderly mother and my unborn child as human shields. The cowardice of this man knew absolutely no bounds. But he was wrong. Those words didn't move me. They disgusted me. However, his desperate plea gave me an encoden idea. A much cleaner, much more permanent conclusion to this mess. I sat in silence for a long moment, pretending to weigh my options. Then, I looked down at him. All right, I said. I will give you one way out, but do not mistake it for forgiveness. This confrontation needed an ending not just to punish, but to cleanly amputate him from my life. Would there be redemption? Or would it all end behind cold iron bars? My words, I will give you one way out, hit him like a life preserver tossed into a hurricane. Tyler's dead eyes flared with a desperate, pathetic spark of hope. He scrambled forward, gripping the edge of my mattress. Really, Sophia? Are you serious? You'll forgive me? You won't call the FBI? I swear to God, I'll do anything. I'll be your slave. Just please don't send me to prison. I raised a hand, a calm, authoritative gesture that shut him up instantly. Don't celebrate yet, I said, my voice remaining an emotionless flatline. The way out I'm offering has nothing to do with forgiveness. Your sins, your betrayal, the physical violence, none of that will ever be forgiven. This is an ultimatum. I am only doing this because we were married for 12 years and because I refuse to let my child grow up with the stigma of having a federal inmate for a father. I am doing this to protect my bloodline, not you. I gave Uncle George a subtle nod. He stepped forward and placed 2 single sheets of paper on the table. No thick legal binders this time, just 2 pages. But their weight was heavier than a life sentence. This is your choice, I said, sliding the first paper toward him. First, this is an uncontested divorce settlement. You will sign it, waiving your right to any and all marital assets. You will leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage, nothing. Furthermore, you will completely and permanently terminate your parental rights to this unborn child. The baby will take my last name, Vance. Your name will not be on the birth certificate. Legally, biologically, and practically, you will be a total stranger to my child. What? Tyler gasped, his pale face turning ashen. Give up my parental rights? No, Sophia, you can't do that. That's my baby too. You can't just take my kid away. You dare invoke your rights as a father? I snapped, my voice finally cracking, like thunder. When you kicked me in the stomach, were you thinking about the baby? When you were swiping corporate funds to buy diamond earrings for your trashy mistress, were you thinking about your child's future? A father like you, a man who abuses his pregnant wife and commits federal fraud, is nothing but a biological disease. I will not have my child bullied on the playground because their father is a disgraced convict. You lost the right to be a father the second your shoe hit my stomach. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't argue. Every brutal word I said was an undeniable fact. I didn't give him a second to breathe. I slid the second sheet of paper forward. That is condition 1. Condition 2, I pointed at the typed document. This is a legally binding contract of exile. Upon leaving this hospital, you and your mother will leave New York State entirely. You will return to Ohio, and you are permanently banned from ever setting foot in the tri-state area again. You are also permanently blacklisted from working in any corporate real estate, logistics, or financial sector in the United States. You will vanish from my city, my industry, and my universe. You're banishing me? How am I supposed to eat? How am I supposed to survive? He whispered, hyperventilating. I'm not banishing you, I replied coldly. I'm giving you the gift of anonymity. You get to start over in a place where no one knows about your spectacular implosion. In exchange for this freedom, and in exchange for my legal team burying the FBI referral, you and your Ohio cronies have exactly under 30 days to wire the stolen $3 million back into Gold Coast Holdings Treasury. I don't care how you get the money. Sell your mother's house. Sell your organs. Beg in the streets. You have 1 month. If the wire transfer is short by a single cent on day 31, this agreement is void. Every audit, every bank record, and every audio file gets messengered directly to the U.S. Attorney's office. The ultimatum was crystal clear, utterly ruthless, and mathematically inescapable. I was stripping him of everything: his wife, his child, his career, his stolen assets, and even his fake identity as a New York elite. I was hitting the factory reset button on his life, sending him back to absolute zero. But in exchange, I was handing him the most valuable asset on earth: his physical freedom. The choice is yours, I said, delivering my final verdict. A new life in poverty, but out of a cage. Or 20 years in federal lockdown as a convicted embezzler. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to sign. With that, I stood up from the bed, adjusted my robe, and walked out of the suite with Uncle George, leaving Tyler alone in the sterile room to stare down the barrel of his ruined life. I knew exactly what he would choose. A coward and a narcissist like Tyler would never choose the cell block. He would choose freedom, no matter how bitter or humiliating the terms. He would sell his own mother's house and surrender his unborn child just to save his own skin. The play had finally reached its curtain call. I didn't sleep at the hospital that night. Uncle George had me driven to a heavily guarded, hyper-exclusive Gold Coast estate in the Hamptons. I needed physical distance from the city. I needed to wash the filth of that day off my soul and prepare for the empire I was about to inherit. And, exactly as I predicted, as the sun rose the next morning, my lead attorney called. Tyler had signed. He signed every single page without negotiation, accepting all my apocalyptic terms. The cord was cut. Over the next few weeks, the machine worked efficiently and coldly. Exactly $3.1 million was wired into the Gold Coast corporate accounts. I didn't care how he and his accomplices scraped it together, how many generational homes were auctioned off, how many humiliating loans were begged for. But I knew the pound of flesh they paid was astronomical. Our divorce was fast-tracked by a private judge and sealed. From a legal standpoint, Tyler Smith ceased to exist in my world. He was a ghost. A month later, I got a random message from one of Tyler's distant cousins back in Ohio. She told me that Tyler and his mother had slunk back into town in the Persian Intrigue, dead of night. There were no sleek Mercedes SUVs or designer luggage this time. They arrived on a Greyhound bus, hauling a few battered suitcases. They couldn't even return to Mrs. Smith's house because she had been forced to liquidate it to pay me back. They had moved into a decaying, mold-infested trailer on the outskirts of town, owned by a resentful relative. The karmic debt had arrived slow, silent, but unimaginably cruel. Tyler, the once arrogant Manhattan executive, the handsome golden boy, was now an unemployed, disgraced bankrupt. In a small Rust Belt town where gossip spreads faster than a wildfire, the truth of his downfall became the daily entertainment at the local diner. He didn't dare show his face in public. He spent his days drinking cheap beer on a sagging porch, forced to listen to his mother's endless screeching lamentations. Mrs. Smith, who had spent years bragging to her neighbors about her billionaire son, was now the town joke. She no longer paraded around giving unsolicited advice. She sat in her cramped trailer, crying, cursing my name and cursing God. But nobody felt an ounce of pity for her. They looked at her with pure disgust, a living monument to the consequences of greed and delusion. As for Bella, the beautiful, ambitious muse, after being dropped by her agency due to the leaked files and having her sugar baby ledgers exposed on gossip blogs, she was entirely radioactive. No wealthy man in New York would go near to her. She slinked back to whatever small town she came from, her dreams of being a billionaire's wife going up in smoke, leaving her with nothing but a ruined reputation and an expiring youth. Every single character in that tragedy received the exact ending they earned. They planted seeds of betrayal and deceit, and now they were choking on the bitter harvest of isolation, poverty, and regret. But while they sank into the dark abyss of their punishments, somewhere else, a new sun was rising. I did not abort my baby. She was my blood. She was entirely innocent. I chose to keep her and raise her on my own. I wanted to prove to Tyler and to the entire world that a woman does not need a man to thrive or to build a beautiful, perfect family. When the time came, I gave birth to a stunning, perfect little girl. I named her Aurora because she was my new dawn. My greatest wish was for her to live a life of absolute peace, far above the ugly storms her mother had to weather. Holding Aurora filled every cracked, empty space in my heart. She gave me a nuclear-powered purpose. I had found the ultimate love of my life not in a man, but in the tiny, fragile life I held against my chest. After the divorce was finalized and the legal fires were put out, I didn't immediately rush back to the CEO's chair. I asked Uncle George, who had truly become a surrogate father to me, to grant me an extended leave of absence. I needed absolute serenity to welcome my angel into the world. I chose a breathtaking, ultra-private Gold Coast retreat in Carmel by the Sea, California. The air was crisp, the Pacific Ocean crashed beautifully against the cliffs, and the scent of pine and salt water was a constant lullaby. Uncle George spared no expense, flying in a concierge medical team, private chefs, and dedicated staff. I lived in a cliffside estate, insulated from the chaos of the cruise world, treated like absolute royalty. Those were the most profoundly peaceful months of my life. No more calculating corporate espionage, no more navigating fake smiles or dodging Tyler's lies. Every morning I walked along the foggy California beaches. I watched the tides pull the sand away, feeling as though the ocean was physically pulling the trauma out of my body. Every afternoon I sat on the massive cedar deck, reading, listening to Chopin, and watching the West Coast sunsets explode in violent purples and golds. I dedicated all my energy to the soul growing inside me. I talked to her. I read her stories. I hummed the jazz standards my father used to play for me. And every time she kicked, it felt like a sacred conversation. That primal, unstoppable force of maternal love stitched my soul back together. The betrayal still existed in my memory, but it no longer held power over me. It didn't keep me up at night. It had simply become scar tissue, a brutal but necessary lesson that forged me into titanium. The day I had been waiting for finally arrived. After a long night in a state-of-the-art private birthing suite in California, I delivered a healthy, screaming baby girl. The second they placed her on my chest, the second I saw her perfect face, and smelled that intoxicating newborn scent. The exhaustion evaporated. I wept. Tears of absolute victory. A new life had officially begun. Uncle George flew the corporate jet from New York the second he got the call. When he walked into the room and held Aurora, his usually terrifying, stone-cold face melted into a puddle of pure joy. His eyes were shining with tears. "She looks exactly like your father, Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The eyes, the nose, even the way she scowls in her sleep. Looking at her is like looking at Matthew. He looked up at me. "You did it, kid. You brought the Vance bloodline back to life." The day my daughter was born was the day I made the ultimate decision. A decision that would alter the trajectory of Wall Street and my own destiny. I was done hiding. I was done being a shadow. I was going to step into the light. I was officially taking the throne as the public chairman and CEO of Gold Coast Holdings. I wasn't doing it for the ego or the billions. I was doing it for Aurora. I wanted to build an impenetrable fortress for her. I wanted her to grow, up looking at a mother who was a titan, a single mother who could carry an empire on her shoulders without breaking a sweat. I wanted her to know in her bones that a woman can forge her own empire, control her own destiny, and build her own happiness entirely independent of a man. A few months after Aurora was born, I returned to New York City. Not as Sophia, the meek Brooklyn girl, not as the heartbroken, betrayed wife. I returned as my ultimate, evolved self. Sophia Vance, chairman of the board and CEO of Gold Coast Holdings. My sudden public emergence sent shockwaves through the global financial markets. A massive press conference was held in the glass atrium of our Manhattan headquarters. I stepped up to the podium, not looking like a tired new mother, but wearing a razor-sharp, bespoke white Tom Ford power suit. I radiated an aura of absolute terrifying authority. I faced a sea of flashing cameras and Bloomberg reporters without a flinch, officially announcing my assumption of my father's mantle. I didn't dodge the invasive questions about my missing 12 years or my spectacularly brief marriage to a disgraced executive. I addressed them head-on, my voice calm but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "We all make miscalculations in life," I told the silent press corps. "We all stumble. The metric of a leader is not where they fall, but the ferocity with which they rise. My past is written. My present and my future belong to Gold Coast Holdings and my daughter. I will use every ounce of my intellect and capital to expand my father's legacy and build a world my daughter can be proud to inherit." My speech dominated the news cycles. Wall Street didn't see me as a tabloid victim. They saw a ruthless, highly capable apex predator, a resilient mother, a new, terrifying symbol of female corporate power. And so, my reign began. I attacked my work with a lethal precision. I didn't just stabilize the empire. I aggressively expanded it, acquiring green tech, startups, and launching massive sustainable real estate developments across the globe. I elevated Gold Coast to international dominance, negotiating directly with sovereign wealth funds and foreign heads of state. I became a true general. In the boardroom, decisive, unforgiving to my enemies, but fiercely loyal to my enemies' people. But outside the boardroom, I was just a mother. I guarded my time with Aurora, fiercely. I also launched a massive philanthropic arm, the Matthew Vance Foundation, endowed with hundreds of millions, specifically designed to fund housing and legal aid for single mothers and domestic abuse survivors across America. I wanted to weaponize my own trauma to build shields for women who I didn't have the billions I had to defend themselves. I wanted them to know that no matter how dark the night gets, they can survive because their children are watching. Sometimes, late at night, after Aurora was asleep in her nursery, I would stand on the balcony of my penthouse, a glass of bourbon in hand, looking out over the glittering skyline of New York. I would think back on the entire chaotic journey, the kick in the mall, the isolation, the legal slaughter, and this glorious resurrection. I no longer felt any anger toward Tyler. In a twisted way, I silently thanked him I thanked him for the kick that jolted me awake from a pathetic 12-year coma of subservience. I thanked him for a betrayal so profound it forced me to detonate my fake life and step into a reality a million times brighter. I learned the ultimate truth. The greatest happiness a woman can achieve is not finding a perfect man to lean on. The greatest happiness is becoming the most lethal, perfect version of yourself, being the absolute master of your own fate. The queen had finally returned to her throne, a throne built not just with capital and influence, but forged in tears, raw power, and the infinite, violent love of a mother. My life wasn't ending. It was just getting started. A blindingly bright future lay ahead for me and Aurora. And I knew that, somewhere up there, Matthew Vance was smiling. My dear friends, and so ends a chaotic journey filled with the most intense, emotional extremes, from the absolute abyss of betrayal and agony to the peak of righteous fury, and finally to the glorious, unstoppable resurrection of our Pelianty protagonist, Sophia. As the final words of this story echo, I believe what lingers in our minds isn't just the adrenaline of a spectacular revenge, but a deep, profound reflection on the nature of love, the terrifying cost of blind trust, and the dormant, explosive power that lives inside every single person, especially a woman. Sophia's story, with all its tragic details, is not just a tale of marital infidelity. It is a massive mirror, a raw reflection of reality that exposes the darkest corners of human nature when it is poisoned by greed and entitlement. And through that mirror, it hands us incredibly valuable life lessons. These aren't just lessons to listen to and forget. They are lessons to internalize, so we can walk through life with sharper eyes, stronger spines, and fuller hearts. The first, and perhaps most agonizing lesson Sophia's tragedy teaches us, is the extreme danger of sacrifice that is not met with respect. For 12 years, Sophia chose to shrink herself. She abandoned her billionaire identity, her power, and her status to play the role of a silent, supportive wife. Her actions were born from a pure heart, a noble desire to find unconditional love. She secretly paved the golden road for her husband's career, genuinely believing that his success was their shared happiness. But she made a fatal miscalculation. Her mistake wasn't the sacrifice itself, it was the silent sacrifice. Giving everything unconditionally without demanding the prudence that her partner understand the sheer magnitude of her gift. Tyler's unnaturally smooth ascent, achieving power without shedding his own blood, sweat, and tears, completely warped his reality. He didn't value what he had. It bred a toxic arrogance, an entitled delusion that he was a self-made god. He got so used to receiving the world on a silver platter that he began to view his wife's devotion as standard operating procedure, and eventually, as something to look down upon. Sacrifice is like pouring water. If you pour it onto fertile soil that appreciates it, it will grow a beautiful garden. But if you pour it into a desert of entitlement and narcissism, it will just evaporate, leaving you completely drained and empty. This happens in real life every single day. How many women silently put their everys in lives on hold, giving up promising careers to manage a household, setting aside their own passions to be the invisible scaffolding holding up their husband's spotlight. That sacrifice is deeply noble, but it only holds value if it is recognized, validated, and fiercely protected by the partner. If your sacrifice is met with apathy or treated as a woman's duty, then it is time to hit the brakes and ask, is this worth it? Am I becoming a stepping stone for someone? There's else to trample on. This story is a blaring siren for all of us. In any relationship, the scales of giving and taking must be balanced. True love is not a blind charity. It is a joint venture, a mutual carrying of the weight. Never hide your efforts. Transparency doesn't kill romance. It builds respect. And respect is the only concrete foundation a marriage can survive on. The second lesson, highly practical in our modern dating world, is the critical need to see past the packaging and dissect a person's true character. Sophia fell for Tyler's rugged good looks, his smooth talking, and his hungry ambition. She fell in love with a script she wrote in her own head, the gritty underdog who fights his way to the top. She didn't take the time to stress test his, quote, the character. She didn't observe how he handled real power, and she paid a catastrophic price when the charming facade melted away to reveal a greedy, violent, soulless narcissist. This reminds us that when choosing a partner, we can never be blinded by aesthetics or smooth words. A silver tongue can hide a mouthful of venom. Rushing into a relationship running purely on emotional adrenaline is like playing Russian roulette. Take your time. Watch them closely. Watch how they treat their parents, their subordinates, the waiter at a restaurant, or the people who can do absolutely nothing for them. Because character isn't built in grand romantic gestures, it leaks out in the micro interactions. Watch how they handle failure, stress, and criticism. A man of actual high value doesn't play the victim or blame the portinator. Universe. He takes extreme ownership. And above all, a person with a functioning moral compass will never use physical violence or psychological terrorism to win an argument. Tyler's kick wasn't a momentary lapse of reason. It was the physical manifestation of a rotting soul that had been hiding under a tailored suit. A man who can physically strike a woman, let alone the woman carrying his child, has crossed a moral event horizon. There is no coming back from that. So, guard your trust like gold. Use your brain just as much as your heart. A person can act out a role for a few months, maybe even a few years, but they cannot fake their character for a lifetime. Remember, a partner doesn't have to provide a life of luxury, but they absolutely must provide psychological safety and unwavering respect. A man doesn't have to be perfect, but he must never, ever be dangerous. The 1-2-year challenge from Sophia's father is the ultimate masterclass in this kind of prudence. He didn't forbid her from falling in love. He just demanded she deploy enough time to run a proper due diligence on the human heart. And finally, the most powerful, inspiring lesson of all, the human capacity to weaponize trauma and rise from the ashes. The moment Sophia was kicked by her husband, she hit the absolute rock bottom of humiliation and agony. 99% of people would have shattered. They would have drowned in a puddle of tears and victimhood. But Sophia didn't. In her darkest, most agonizing second, an apex predator woke up inside her. She didn't let the pain consume her. She weaponized it. She turned her heartbreak into a cold, calculated, tactical strike. She morphed from a passive victim into the terrifying architect of her own justice. From chilling 1-0 minute phone call, to the forensic financial audits, to the total legal annihilation of her enemies, Sophia's journey is a violent, beautiful testament to female strength. It proves that when a woman is pushed into a corner, when she has nothing left to lose and a child to protect, she can execute maneuvers that defy human comprehension. That power didn't come from her billionaire bank account. It came from her core. From the primal instinct to survive, the sacred rage of a mother, and an ego that refused to be buried. But Sophia's true resurrection wasn't the revenge. Revenge is just demolition. The true resurrection was when she put on that white suit and walked into the Dade boardroom. She didn't run away to an island to hide. She faced the fire, took the crown, and turned her personal nightmare into the fuel to build an empire for her daughter. Her ultimate happy ending wasn't finding a better guy. It was finding herself, finding absolute peace in her child and the empire she commanded. The message here is loud and clear. True happiness is not found by anchoring yourself to someone else. True happiness is becoming an unbreakable pillar, yourself. A woman's market value is not determined by the man standing next to her. It is dictated entirely by her own competence and grace. Every story we bring you here on Twilight Tales, no matter how dramatic or soapy, serves a higher purpose, to educate and empower. We hope that through emotional roller coasters like Sophia's, you can reflect on your own lives, extract the tactical lessons, and apply them to become stronger, smarter, and happier. As the author of this adaptation, I admit there were scenes that kept me up at night. The kick was the most brutal to write. It wasn't just assault. It was total collapse of the human social contract. It permanently downgraded Tyler from a bad husband to a monster. When adapting Sophia, I didn't want her to be a flawless Marvel superhero. I wanted her to have the blind spots of a woman deeply in love. The contrast between Sophia the housewife and Sophia the chairman is what makes her lethal. They aren't two different people. The tragedy simply unlocked her final form. I loved the father's 1-2 year challenge. It showed a profound, ruthless, paternal love. He didn't just want her to inherit money. He wanted her to inherit grit. That challenge was the exact psychological boot camp she needed to survive. The betrayal. And I deliberately made sure Sophia didn't scream or throw plates during her revenge. She executed a cold corporate slaughter. A 10-minute phone call that erased a man's entire existence shows a terrifying disparity in power. That is, high-class revenge. And ultimately, I didn't want her to fall into the arms of a new prince. Charming. I wanted her to find purpose. Seeing her as a titan of industry and a fierce single mother is the most empowering image possible. Her happiness is self-generated. That is total victory. I firmly believe Sophia's story is a universal truth. Women may be vulnerable when they love, but when you cross them, they can become a force of nature that no man can survive. Dear viewers, before we sign off, we want to express our deepest gratitude for your likes, comments, and the amazing energy you bring to this community. Every single interaction proves we are building something meaningful here. We do want to offer a quick, standard disclaimer so everyone understands the framework of our channel. All stories on Twilight Tales, including the one you just heard, are works of dramatic fiction designed to entertain and provoke thought. These are not true crime documentaries or leaked memoirs. We do not investigate real people. We build these narratives based on universal human conflicts, greed, infidelity, corporate ambition that happen in the real world every day. However, to craft a compelling narrative arc, all names, corporations, like gold, Coast Holdings, locations, and specific legal maneuvers are entirely fabricated by our writing team. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual corporate entities is purely coincidental. Furthermore, the events in this story should not be taken as actual legal, financial, or psychological advice. Do not try to execute a hostile asset seizure based on a YouTube video if you are navigating divorce, financial fraud, or abuse in your real life. Please seek out licensed attorneys, financial advisors, and therapists in your jurisdiction. Finally, our stories are never meant to attack or defame any specific demographic, gender, or profession. The characters are literary archetypes designed to explore the extremes of the human condition, and that brings our story to a close today. Thank you so much for riding along with us until the very end of Sophia's explosive journey. What did you think of Tyler's fatal mistake and Sophia's ruthless corporate counterattack? Do you? I think forgiveness is ever an option in cases of extreme betrayal like this. Drop your thoughts, debates, and opinions down in the comments below. If this story fired you up or gave you a new perspective, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to Twilight Tales and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next dramatic drop. Your support is the engine that keeps us writing. Stay strong, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next video. Yeah,